All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this briefing today about important legislation coming up in the 2023 Oregon legislature. We are going to have a great discussion this morning and answer your questions as well. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Tim Miller. I am the director of Oregon Business for Climate. We are a league of nearly 100 businesses around the state in industries across the board, and employing about 30,000 Oregonians. And we believe that it is not only, well, it is an imperative that we address climate change as fast as possible for the benefit of our communities and our economy and everyone in Oregon. We also believe that it's an opportunity for us to get on this giant change in the economy for the businesses involved. And it really can touch just about every business in Oregon to either align with this change or serve this change as we address climate change. Oregon Business for Climate is pleased to be co-hosting today's briefing with Oregon Environmental Council. And I'd like to introduce now Nora Apter, who's the Climate Program Director at OEC, who will be providing the policy backdrop for us, the federal backdrop and other sort of context for the discussion. And then we'll hear from legislators. But first, as we all know, business leaders are really a critical voice in advancing equitable climate policies. And I'm sure our legislators on the call today will mention that or share with you all the importance of business voices in their work. We're honored to be joined by three of Oregon's leading legislators on addressing climate change today. And we have leaders from both the House side and the Senate side. So we'll get a full perspective today. We're going to, in a few minutes, these leading legislators are going to touch on sort of the major climate policies that are going to be flowing into the 23 legislature. It's not going to be a comprehensive list. Obviously, there are other bills that'll be moving through the process, but we're going to touch on some of the major ones today and answer your questions about other process questions or policy questions as well. So, and then we'll dive into a Q&A after we've heard from the legislators about what they're seeing coming up. And you see here, it's in these three key categories that we'll be touching on. So, and by the way, please use the chat function. We're running this as a regular Zoom meeting, so it's very open, and feel free to put your questions in chat, and we'll field them mostly toward the end. So let me start with introductions first. We're very happy to have Senator, I'll go in the order that they'll be speaking, Senator Kate Lieber with us today. She serves Senate District 14, which includes Beaverton, Aloha, and portions of Washington and Multnomah County. She's also a lawyer and Portland Community College instructor. She's currently chair of Senate Energy and Environment, and she will be majority leader, as well as serving on a number of other committees. And relevant to today's call, she's also co-chair of the Task Force on Resilient Efficient Buildings. Many call it the Rebuildings Task Force. And that task force is charged with developing some policies that will flow into the legislature to really proactively and dramatically address the emissions from our buildings in the state. Next, we'll have Representative Con Pham. Representative Pham is a state representative from House District 46, representing Northeast and Southeast Portland, including the J District, Montevilla, Mount Tabor, Foster Powell, Lentz, and Laurelhurst neighborhoods. She's first elected in 2020 and is the first Vietnamese American legislator in the state legislature, and currently the only elected Asian Pacific Islander in the Oregon state government. So Rep. Pham was a leading founder also and a spokesperson for the groundbreaking Portland Clean Energy Fund initiative, which most of you know about, which was successfully passed in 2018 in Portland. She's also, she takes environmental and climate justice as one of the three key pillars of her work. She serves on a number of committees, also the vice chair of the BIPOC caucus and a member of the Environmental Caucus and the Progressive Caucus. And now she's very involved more and more in transportation leadership as well, including serving on the Joint Interim Committee on the I-5 Bridge. So you hear some interesting updates there about transportation policy in Oregon. And then finally, we'll hear from Senator Michael Dembrow. Senator Dembrow serves Senate District 23, which includes portions of Southeast and Northeast Portland and the city of Maywood Park. And his long tenure, he was first elected to the legislature in 2008. He's been a huge leader on climate legislation, including leading the fight to establish a cap on greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. He has substantially increased funding for career and technical education across the state. Previously served as chair of the Senate Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and a number of other important committees and chairing roles. So a great lineup of speakers today. I'm trying to move fast here because we got tons of great content. I want to turn it over to Nora for a backdrop on the recent federal climate action and the green wave. And please take it away, Nora, and I'll be advancing the slides, so let me know what you want to do.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, everybody, again, for joining us this morning. Before we hand it over to our legislator panelists, I just wanted to provide some quick context around both recent federal climate action as well as the recent midterm elections, which will both have an important impact on the 2023 legislative session. Next slide, please. So first, as folks are aware, we just had an election, and those midterm election results really made clear that Oregonians want people in office who are committed to climate action. And so much so, some have declared the election a green wave. Governor-elect Tina Kotek ran on her track record of passing transformative climate policies like the legislature's 100% clean electricity law, and pledged to defend and build on the state's recent climate progress. Oregon voters also overwhelmingly approved Measure 113, which will hold politicians accountable for unexcused absences from the Capitol. And over the last legislative sessions, or last several legislative sessions, anti-climate legislators have actually fled the Capitol to prevent the passage of a number of bills, including major climate legislation. So that's an important piece of progress there. Likewise, we have seen that pro-environment majorities are going to continue in both the House and the Senate in the Oregon legislature. So all this means we have a really great opportunity this session to continue to build on the progress of recent years and advance more ambitious, equitable climate policies, create jobs, and build on our clean energy economy. Next slide, please. So what's also really exciting and different going into this session is the incredible opportunity we have to leverage recent federal climate action and investments, and most notably the Inflation Reduction Act, which Congress passed earlier this year, will invest an unprecedented $370 billion in climate and clean energy programs nationwide. And in fact, a recent analysis by the investment bank Credit Suisse found that the law may actually result in at least twice that amount. So that could mean total climate investments upwards of $800 billion. And that's because many of the IRA's most important provisions for driving decarbonization and lower consumer energy costs, like its incentives for electric vehicles, electric appliances, zero carbon electricity, and more, are uncapped tax credits. So that means as long as you meet their terms, the government will award them. There's no limit written into the law that restricts how much the government can spend. That same report went on to say the IRA will have a profound effect across industries in the next decade and beyond, and could ultimately shape the direction of the American economy. Next slide, please. So what this means for Oregon is that in the months and years to come, this legislation has the potential to supercharge the benefits of our existing climate programs and policies, drive down energy costs for Oregon families and businesses, create thousands of high-quality jobs for Oregonians, building on our existing clean energy workforce, and help our communities prepare for and adapt to the impacts of climate change. However, and this really cannot be overstated, securing the full economic development, job creation, and climate potential of this law hinges in large part upon strong state implementation. Next slide, please. So I'll come back to that last point in a minute, but I want to highlight just a few examples of how the IRA's investments will translate into tangible benefits for Oregonians. And these are numbers coming straight from the White House's own estimates. So hundreds of thousands of low and moderate income households in Oregon will be eligible for rebates covering up to 100% of the cost of installing new electric appliances. New homeowners will save an average of 5% on their utility bills if the state fully leverages new grant incentives to strengthen building energy codes. And millions of Oregonians will be eligible for upfront discounts on electric vehicles, as well as Oregon's more than 37,000 farms, which could or will be eligible to receive funding to implement climate smart agricultural practices and reward their stewardship. Next slide, please. So those are just a few of the many examples of how the Inflation Reduction Act could really change and help lift up communities, businesses, and local economies across the state. But there is so much work ahead to ensure that Oregon is best positioned to maximize the IRA's potential. And the extent to which Oregonians see the benefits of these transformative investments will depend in part on whether the state has strong programs, policies, and processes in place to implement them. So this next legislative session is going to be really key to positioning Oregon to leverage these federal investments and deliver meaningful results for everyday Oregonians. The more policies and programs we have in place to drive down climate pollution and ensure a strong and thriving workforce, the more competitive Oregon will be in securing federal grant funding, and the faster we can translate these investments into real on-the-ground benefits for our local economies and people across the state. In particular, it is critical that our state agencies are adequately resourced to apply for and administer funding, and that state investments and infrastructure decisions consider and prioritize climate impacts and apply strong labor requirements. Decisions around federal investments in infrastructure projects have the potential to make or break our climate future and to lift up or undermine a strong Oregon workforce. So with this unprecedented federal funding opportunity coming to Oregon, we can't afford to leave billions of dollars on the table or misdirect funds. So as President Biden has made clear, the federal government cannot build a better America alone. It needs state and local leadership to act as coordinators and help prepare communities to benefit from transformative infrastructure funding. So we're really eager to work with legislative champions this session to maximize this opportunity and translate these federal investments into meaningful near-term benefits for Oregon's families, workers, businesses, and local economies. And I'm really eager to turn it over to the legislators we have with us today to lay out some of the ways that we have the chance to do that this session. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nora, for that backdrop. Yeah, really critical, sort of a key theme of the whole legislature. This session is going to be maximizing our benefit from federal legislation. So looking forward to hearing that theme too. Let's turn it over now to Senator Lieber and hearing about what's happening in healthy and efficient buildings and building space in general, and anything else you want to touch on, Senator.
Terrific. Thank you, Tim, so much for having me. And Nora, thank you for that introduction. You know, the IRA was not even a glimmer in our eyes when we ended the last session. And so this is a really, really exciting time in climate, and we have this unbelievable, incredible opportunity. So my name is Kate Lieber. I have just taken on a new role as the majority leader in the Senate, and I'm looking forward to doing that. But one of the things that is really important to me is to continue on with my work that I've done with the Rebuilding Task Force. And Nora's absolutely right that you know, buildings are the second largest sort of emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And it is critical to both mitigating those emissions, but also adapting to climate change. We know climate change is here, and that we have seen proof of it through our wildfires, the smoke and the heat. So I think the next slide, Tim. Oh, let's move on. All right. So buildings, you know, buildings not only are something that is emitting greenhouse gas emissions, they're also providing shelter, right? They're providing. So we need to figure out how we can make sure that our buildings are not only efficient, but that they're also healthy. we have to, you have to understand that new buildings, approximately a third of the buildings in Oregon that will exist in 2050 haven't even been built yet. So when you think about a third of our buildings are are coming, it's important to act now to make sure that those buildings are as efficient as possible. Existing buildings, so about 85% of Oregon's single-family residences were built prior to 2000, and that was before we had the prevalence of our energy codes that we have now. So we've got buildings that are already built that are inefficient, and buildings that will be built to new standards, and those standards we have to make sure that are appropriate. We also realized that nearly 100 Oregonians died in the heat wave last summer, and thousands more were affected by smoke. So how can we have our buildings be those resilient sort of places for people to be and getting out of harm's way? And so that's another piece of the puzzle that we have to understand. Next slide. So building codes. It is true that Oregon's energy code is ahead of the many states. It's true, and you can see that on this graph. It's a true statement. But we are behind in our neighbors, meaning Washington and California have stronger energy codes than we do right now. And why is that a problem? Well, we do a lot of trading. This is our trading partners. We trade a lot of people back and forth and workers. And in order for us to sort of keep up within that same economy and not become this sort of, and dumping ground is too strong of a word, but not become the place where sort of the less efficient things go because we're not as efficient. We've got to make sure that our energy codes are matching up with our neighbors of Washington and California. We saw that, remember, with sort of clean trucks when that happened. We had a lot of the diesel trucks come here, and that's something that we want to make sure that we avoid for the future. So what have we been doing in this task force? Well, the Resilient Buildings Task Force. Next slide. Sorry, Tim. There you go. The Resilient Buildings Task Force started out. We really started out with REACH code. So and it was a code that would allow communities to decide whether they wanted to implement it and have a higher sort of code standard for their buildings. That really morphed into this task force, partially because we knew we could do better, and we knew we could do more, and we knew that we had to do something around buildings. So the task force was tasked with identifying and evaluating policies relating to building codes and building decarbonization, where we looked at both new and existing buildings. We really wanted to understand how we could utilize policies to get at our goals, our climate goals, but we also wanted to maximize additional benefits. We know the only way that we're going to be able to do the scale of electrification that we need to do is to become energy efficient, right? We have to use less energy. And that's one of the pillars that is so important, right? Because people talk about this like, well, you can't really electrify everything because you know what, like there's not enough transmission lines, there's not enough. Well, that may be the case, but if we become more efficient, we actually can and should electrify more of our economy. So we definitely looked at energy efficiency. We really looked at resiliency against climate change. What does that look like? How can we make it healthier for, improve public health and air quality? And so we're not quite through our work yet. We have one more meeting to approve a report that is in draft form. But we had 27 task force members who worked really diligently on evaluating these policies. We had some modelers come in, and if anybody is interested to read all of the voluminous reports that we have put out, you are more than welcome. But the modeling and the information that was done is really, really something. And it really showed us that we do have some alignment around certain issues. So let's go to the next slide. So The rebuilding task force, we did the process that we took was really extensive. We utilized surveys for our members to try to figure out what would you like to have modeled. Of those models, what do you like, what do you don't like, and so we had this very sort of robust process, and we really came up. And I put this sort of in the order of how many of the task force members sort of are aligned on it. So a lot of alignment around promoting, incentivizing, and subsidizing energy efficiency, heating and cooling, right? We know if we do that, we are going to get a long way in our efficiency, and it's going to help with sort of the greenhouse gas emissions. People were very interested in continuing our heat pump programs, and quite frankly, with the IRA, it's a no-brainer with that. We talked about sort of decarbonizing institutional and public buildings. Look, if we're going to put public money towards something, those buildings should be held to a higher standard, and we should be creating buildings that are healthy for those who live and work around them. We want to promote and incentivize air purification systems. The material related emissions, fascinating, right? The amount of carbon that's released by utilizing a different kind of concrete compared to another is quite a lot. So how do we work that into making sure that our buildings from tip to tail are really getting much more robust, and we're lowering our greenhouse gas emissions? Can we modify Energy Trust's mission? Can we make it so that they're able to go out and incentivize more heat pumps? And that is going to be a really interesting discussion. We talked a lot about building performance standards. That's going to be sort of for our new buildings, and how do you make sure that those new buildings that are going to be here for a long time are as efficient as possible? We want to align our energy efficiency programs with state climate goals, meaning let's put the executive orders into statutes, and then let's look at the energy code and the building codes and try to understand whether there's room in there for more efficient energy. So that's where we are right now. We know the devil's in the details, and we know that we're going to be pursuing a variety of these because not just one. If you stack them all, that's where we get the most bang for the buck. So I'm going to stop there. I think my time is up, but I appreciate you all so much.
Fantastic, Senator Lieber. Thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership and doing overtime, running this task force all summer and all into this winter now. So let's turn it over to Rep. Pham to hear about what's going on in clean and equitable transportation. Rep. Pham, thank you so much for your leadership in this area, and obviously for years and years of leadership on equity and justice and climate change.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to try to see if I can share.
Oh, yes. Let me stop sharing.
Screen here. Let's see. Hold on one second. I'm using a new slide presentation, so I'm trying to use Canva. Let me see if I can. There we go. Does everyone see just my full screen now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I am so happy to be here to engage in hopefully lively discussion about our vision for the 21st century transportation system that we need in Oregon. I sit, as was mentioned, I sit on the Joint Transportation Committee as well as the Interstate 5 Bridge Committee because I'm really passionate about transportation. For me, it's where all of my values really intersect, whether it's around climate or equity. For me, transportation isn't just about getting goods and services from point A to point B. It's really about access to opportunity, and for businesses as well as for our community. And I mentioned fiscal responsibility because I started out as a community organizer, organizing on the streets of 82nd Avenue, and was consistently told, there's not enough money. And so it just really led to a real interest in me about where we spend our transportation dollars and how does that reflect our values. As a legislator, I've had to issue condolences to multiple families. Well, actually, I'll talk about that a little bit more, but let me start talking about climate first. So as you all know or may know, transportation is the #1 source of greenhouse gas pollution in our state. And unlike other sectors, transportation emissions are actually increasing. We've done good work on utilities and electricity. We're with Senator Lieber's support, we're moving on buildings, but transportation is one area we've actually gone backwards. We also are seeing increasing road deaths. Oregon actually has the 10th most dangerous roads in the country. And for BIPOC communities, it's even worse because low income and BIPOC communities are more likely to live, work, take the bus, walk along some of our most dangerous high traffic corridors. And of those, pedestrians and bicyclists are some of the most vulnerable users, and pedestrians make up 38% of the traffic deaths in our state, which is unacceptable. And what I was about to share was that I feel really passionate about this because after hearing about deaths in my Southeast district, I always issue condolences to the families. And it's starting to be, quite frankly, I don't want to be just issuing empty words saying that I am so sorry and that I commit to fighting for safer infrastructure if we can't actually back up our words with action. And lastly, transportation has huge impacts on our community's health. Everything from asthma to low birth weight, heart disease to even academic achievement is impacted by the amount of tailpipe pollution coming from our freeways and highways. And one last thing is that we're also facing is, of course, rising cost of living in Oregon. As people are finding it harder and harder to get affordable housing, they're having to move further and further away, which means that transportation costs are actually making up an increasing part of people's household budgets. So the good news is that we do have an opportunity through some of the federal infrastructure dollars to actually help build our 21st century transportation system. Unlike state money, federal money is more flexible and we can use it for public transit and safety and biking and walking. But unfortunately, ODOT is planning to use most of their flexible federal dollars on highways, while many of the things that we can't fund through state dollars remain underfunded. There's also some good news and bad news around financing. The good news around our gas tax is that people are using less gasoline, which means it's good for our climate goals. It means cleaner air for everyone, but it does create a funding crisis for our state. You can see here, this is from 2022 to 2029. This is from ODOT. At least the first two lines are from ODOT. The red line represents the direction of state highway fund expenditures that they're predicting. And then the green line is state highway fund revenue. And so it will lead to a funding gap of about $250 million a year by 2029. And it will continue to grow. And if we meet our state's DEQ goals, which were not included, but I added, this is the state highway fund revenue. If we actually comply with our DEQ goals, then that funding gap doubles. And ODOT is currently making plans, assuming that our gas consumption will remain stable, which is, essentially a planning, hoping that we don't meet our climate goals. So we know what it takes to make our roads safer and our climate cooler and our public health stronger. We need to invest and incentivize in public transit and in active transportation. We need to invest and incentivize in the electrification of everything. We need to maintain the existing infrastructure we have, which is our most valuable asset, and also make it safer. And we need to be thinking about how can we lower transportation costs. We are in transition, and as we make this transition, how can we make it easier for working Oregonians? And lastly, it's so connected to housing and making sure that we have land uses that give people the choice to be able to live, work, and play closer to where they are. we're entering in a really challenging time. There is this funding crisis. The gas tax is in permanent decline, and hopefully we will accelerate that. It's not a foregone conclusion that it'll be in decline. We actually have to pass policies to encourage that. But given that funding crisis, we are actually, as a state, embarking on $8.2 billion in freeway expansions that are not that we hope to get some federal dollars for, and get some support from Washington for at least the I-5 bridge project. But overall, we are investing billions of dollars of our state, or planning to invest billions of dollars in freeway expansions. And that means that funding other highway funds that could have been used for maintenance are then being pushed off. And I'm hearing that ODOT is planning to ask for general fund dollars for maintenance, which is pitting road maintenance against really critical housing, healthcare, and human services priorities in a year when we, as Democrats, barely were able to keep our to become reelected and keep our strong majority based on showing that we can deliver and really show that we can respond to the housing crisis that people are facing right now. So yeah, I am really digging into, I'm digging into the finances because here, let me actually go back. I really think it's important that we are really careful about our debt and our commitments to our bondholders, because if the toll revenue falls short, or it has implications on the financial solvency of our transportation system and other transportation needs throughout our state. So I sit on the IBR committee because I am really committed to making sure that we get a seismically resilient, climate-friendly I-5 bridge that is right-sized. One of the things that many people don't realize is that the IBR is a mega project because it's essentially 4 projects in one. So the bridge portion is just that kind of black portion that you see here, but it also includes 5 miles of freeways, 3 freeway interchanges on the Oregon side, and 4 freeway interchanges on the Washington side, and then the light rail project. And, this is the largest infrastructure project in Oregon's history. It's a lot to manage. And we've seen over the past decade that major ODOT projects have had cost overruns of, often double or, even triple sometimes the initial cost estimate. And so I think to make sure that we're keeping a really strong scope of the project, I think a phased approach is something that I think is really important for us to consider, saying, let's try to build a bridge. Let's make sure that we meet our fundamental goal, which is to replace the bridge, and make sure that we have some high capacity transit, but really make sure that we have the funding first and foremost, as we're going to be asked for $1 billion this legislative session, which is going to be probably the biggest ask in 2023. Because there's a lot of asks that are coming at us. We have,
if you could, 1 or 2. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course. Sorry, I can't see any questions. So
that's all right.
Sure, if someone wants to read them out to me. I'm in a presentation mode. I can't read them.
Oh wait, sorry, no, Pam. No questions yet. I just wanted to let you know that we're moving along here, and just another minute or 2 if we could.
Oh, okay. So we have a lot of other transportation needs across our state. Hood River Bridge is going to be asking for $150 million, Burnside Bridge, Powell Boulevard, Hall Boulevard, as well as the public transit investments that we need statewide. ODOT's current tolling plan is regressive as it stands, and partly it's because we have burdensome freeway debt to repay, and so it really leads to we will be forced to actually have to maximize our toll revenue, which means means charging higher prices, not being able to give as much no toll times, because we will have to pay back our bondholders. It's a contractual obligation to pay that back first, which is why we need a full traffic and revenue study on both the Abernathy Bridge and the IBR, so we have a clear sense of how much toll revenue we can realistically expect, because Oregon taxpayers will have to make up for any revenue shortfalls that come up. So I will just conclude by saying that business leaders for climate are an important voice in shaping how we steward our scarce dollars to build a 21st century transportation system. Our transportation system is in transition, and that is a good thing. But it does mean that we have to be very strategic about how we spend and raise our scarce revenue for transportation. We do have to shift from a more 1960s strategy of freeway building to solve our problems in a time of decreasing revenue and in a climate emergency. And I think it's important that business leaders can be an important voice for fiscal responsibility, for doing the full, traffic and revenue studies so that we get the same information that bondholders ask for. If they're asking for an investment grade analysis, we should get the same information before we commit much more, $1 billion to projects. So I look forward to the conversation and working together with all of you to help build the clean, equitable, and climate-friendly transportation system that we need in our state.
Thank you so much, Rep. Pham. I really appreciate that. And I'm gonna now get back to sharing my screen. And I'll look forward to some questions for Rep. Pham on all that. And let's turn it now over to Senator Michael Dembro. Senator Dembro. I'm gonna get that share going.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And while you're doing that, let me just thank Oregon Business for Climate for doing this, and also just for your commitment to climate action. Many of us have been in the trenches for quite a while doing this work. The area that I'm going to be talking about is our use of natural and working lands in a more climate smart way. Those of you who have been following the climate debates know that transportation is a key part of the solution. Buildings are a key part of the solution, but so are smart uses of our lands and waters. And Oregon, as you know, is really privileged in having, so many natural resources, whether we're talking about our rangelands, our arable lands, our forests, our marshlands, our coastal lands, all of which have the capacity to sequester carbon, to store carbon, and to help us really find solutions to this problem beyond what we can do as a single state. Now, I'll talk more about that. If you would go to the next slide, Tim. You may remember that as our work on Cap and Invest proceeded, from 2016 to 2018, 2019, 2020, whether we're talking about House Bill 2020 in 2019 or Senate Bill 50 and 30 in 2020, we became increasingly interested in using our natural and working lands as a way to complement the work that we were doing in reducing emissions. Every state needs to step up and do its share to reduce emissions, and Oregon is no exception. And that was, of course, a big part of our climate agenda and continues to be. But, given our natural resources, we also have the ability to kind of punch above our weight and do more than just reduce our emissions. We can use our natural and working lands in a way that can sequester and store carbon and really benefit other states and other parts of the world that don't, that aren't blessed in the way that we are. And as those bills developed over time, that became more and more of a feature. And I will say that one of the elements also was that we know that our neighbors living in the more rural parts of the state, the frontier parts of the state, are really in the front lines of climate change. They are the many of the impacted communities for, that require adaptation to climate change live there. And we became increasingly concerned and interested in developing these policies in a way that also built rural economies. As you remember, despite all our efforts in that regard, and I will say that those aspects of the Cap and Invest bills, the climate action bills, were of interest to our Republican colleagues. Those are they were encouraging us to keep those parts and get rid of everything else. But of course, that didn't keep them from walking out. And which compelled us to move to what we called, under our breaths, Plan B, right after the big walkout of 2020, where we were prepared, if that were to happen, to move to, to take up the executive order route, which is what we did. And the executive orders, as you probably know, really focus on the emissions reduction side. But it did also include charging the Global Warming Commission with doing a study and setting state goals for carbon sequestration and storage in our natural and working landscapes. And the Global Warming Commission did convene a group that made a set of recommendations that came out, almost exactly a year ago, and that suggested that it was time for us to put this use of our natural and working lands, this focus on sequestration and storage, into statute as one of our priority strategies for combating climate change. And we put out a bill in the short session, but it was very late, and it didn't, we weren't able to get it over the finish line, but we are currently working on a bill that will be, it's in LC form, that is going to do exactly that. And Tim, if you would go to the next slide, I can start telling you about it. This proposal, which is currently LC 3026, it describes the need to consider the land sector in climate mitigation plans. It clarifies that it is the interest of the state to make use of our natural and working lands a key part of our climate action. It provides a vision and principles for our natural and working land strategies. Actually, I'm sorry. What I'm describing here is actually the recommendations that came out of the Oregon Global Warming Commission. It did identify a proposed goal, and it recommended a series of metrics and strategies and a process for creating a natural and working lands sequestration inventory to see where we are now, and then to a process to set goals for increasing our sequestration and storage. And then also it recommended a workforce analysis, because we know that doing this kind of work will require extensive workforce, but also creating extensive workforce opportunities, especially for our rural and frontier areas. Okay, could you go to the next one, please? Yes, so here now, this is the LC 3026 that is going to be introduced very soon. As I mentioned, it creates a statutory framework for using natural and working lands as a key element in our climate action policy. It declares that it's the policy of the state to advance natural and working land strategies for climate action. And this is key. As a result of the executive order, we do have a number of our natural resource agencies that are doing work in the sequestration storage space. But what we need is to make sure that these actions are all coordinated across the different agencies. And this bill will create the framework for that kind of coordination and will direct the agencies to report on the progress that they're making, on the metrics that they're using, and there will be reporting to the Global Warming Commission and oversight through that body with support from the Department of Energy, which supports the Global Warming Commission. It will also create sequestration goals for the state and a process for setting those goals so that they will increase over time. Next slide, please. We heard at the beginning of today's meeting from Nora about the federal resources that are becoming available. And I will say that there will be substantial federal resources in the working lands space. And we need to make sure that all of our agencies are working together in doing the requests, the application for that funding, and to make sure that we're prioritizing correctly and just doing this work in a really coordinated way. And so we will be creating a natural and working lands fund that will be there to receive those dollars along with some general fund dollars to provide the matches that we know we're going to need. And that will be there to do a variety of different activities. It'll include incentives to landowners for adopting practices that support carbon sequestration and that are, in other ways, promoting climate smart practices and greater resiliency. It'll provide technical support to landowners and to local governments. It will, provide support for job development in this area and in those rural parts of the state. And overall, there will be a focus on environmental justice and impacted communities. We still want to adhere to the principles that we developed when we were doing the cap and invest bills, which, you may remember, in that legislation, 40% of our investments needed to go to benefit impacted communities, environmental justice communities. Those are all going to be part of the this bill, and we really will be looking for a lot of support for you all in this as sort of the third leg of this climate action that we're talking about today: buildings, transportation, and smart use of our natural and working lands to combat climate change. So with that, I join my colleagues in being eager to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Senator Denbrough. I really appreciate that. And it's exciting as we look to open up this whole new strategy that I think it's fair to say we haven't really codified or used or maximized yet. So really exciting to look at what we can do with sequestration strategies and natural and working lands and getting them into the picture. I want to start with a question for you, Rep. Pham. Obviously, transportation being such a big part of our emissions, and you mentioned some of the key strategies. There are other strategies too that'll be flowing into the legislature. Just a heads up for folks. possible legislation to help us transition away from fossil diesel toward renewable diesel and other clean fuels. So that's a great strategy that we'll be talking about more. But I wanted to ask you, Rep. Pham, a question. What do you say to business leaders who maybe, they've got trucks moving up and down I-5, they're trying to address their logistics. They've got drivers spending too much time maybe in traffic, maybe thinking about this in as you mentioned, sort of a 1960s approach of, well, clearly we need more lanes. What do you say to help talk about, getting some cars off the road, other modes, induced demand? I know that's a 2-hour topic, but can you give us the 1-minute answer on what you say to business leaders about that? Whoops, I think you're on mute still.
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. And I would love 2 hours to talk about it because induced demand, this is something that I'm realizing that even though it's a very well-known concept among civil engineers and traffic engineers, it's not universally agreed upon. But we have found that the only thing that has been proven to reduce congestion has been actually putting a price on it, because people respond to price signals. And so when you start to put a price on it, whether it's tolling or congestion pricing, people suddenly either consolidate trips, they carpool, or they take public transit. And so we need to be investing in alternatives. So right now, I talked to a lot of people who say, I can't take the bus. It just takes too long. I'm not a transit rider. And it's because we're so used to infrequent, very, low coverage public transit. We need to invest stronger in that. And by putting a price on it, which of course there is a price, it's just right now kind of an invisible price, we can actually reduce congestion. So freight and trucks can actually get through faster. And ODOT's own study this summer has shown that, for example, in the Rose Quarter, tolling would reduce congestion with or without freeway expansion. And so we may actually be expanding lanes for demand that we don't need once we have to toll to pay back the construction. So I would advocate putting tolls first, seeing how much the demand shifts, and then seeing how many lanes do we really need.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Nora, do you have any questions you wanted to lift up?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And thank you all so much for being here today and for all the work you're doing in preparation for the session. We have a question from Alonzo Simpson, which is, at what point does our state start to think holistically about the business case for sustainable economic development in both urban and rural communities? And then there's a second part to that, which is, how will our state become more competitive for new and innovative green businesses to scale, grow, and be recruited here in Oregon? I know folks have been doing a lot of thinking about that. Maybe Senator Lieber, if I could kick it over to you first on that one, and I can drop it in the chat again. So the first one is, at what point does our state start to think holistically about the business case for sustainable economic development? And how can we become more competitive for new and innovative green businesses to scale, grow, and be recruited here in Oregon?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Well, we need to think more strategically about our energy and our the mix of energy that we have in Oregon. I'm actually sponsoring a bill, and Odo has asked for it, to come up with sort of the energy policies around what's the right mix of green energy, how much solar do we need versus wind versus hydrogen, all of those things, because we actually don't have a strategic plan. Once we do the work to get a strategic plan, then I think that we're really in a good place to start thinking strategically about our green business and start thinking sort of more holistically about it. Right now, we're a little bit of scattershot, mostly because I don't think we can overbuild in the green area yet, in certain sectors. But at some point, we have to really, really think from the state level strategically about energy, about the mix of energy, about how we're transmitting energy back and forth across, especially between Eastern and Western Oregon, and about what's realistic, right, in terms of the types of energy that is being used in Eastern Oregon versus the coast, for example. So I think the first step to that question is to really understand what our strategy is, and then follow that strategy.
Thank you, Senator Lieber. Senator Dembrow, anything that you'd like to add to that, maybe thinking from a rural perspective or as it relates to solutions for our natural and working lands?
I would just add, not to play chicken and to throw the ball back at you all, but we could really use your help with this. The Oregon Business for Climate can really be helpful in, giving us suggestions for how we as legislators could really support this effort. Obviously the new governor is going to be crucial in this space. If we could, form a sort of triangle of activity, between your group, legislative leaders, and the governor, I think we could really get somewhere. I will say among legislators nationwide, Oregon is seen as a leader in this space, just relatively speaking. And, I would like to think that that's true in the business space as well. And if it's not, then we need to think about how can we make that so. I would love to see your agenda. Give us an agenda that we can work on.
Great. And Rep. Pham, you wanted to jump in on that?
I did want to jump in. Just this question about holistic economic development. I really think we also need to think about our metrics. We traditionally think of a measurement for how our economy is doing is, our GDP. And I actually introduced a bill just last session to, for genuine progress indicators, because I think when I think about what's a healthy economy, I think we need to have healthy regional economies where our urban communities are directly connected to our rural communities, because we are dependent on each other. But increasingly, I'm seeing there's the global economy and all these ways have left, many rural communities that have agriculture as central don't even have access to good food. And meanwhile, in urban communities, we're also kind of disconnected from some of the rural communities that we depend on for whether it's farming or forestry. And I just think healthy local economies, the more that we can build a healthy local economy that also puts that includes public health and other measures that currently don't get calculated. If I get into 2 car accidents on my way to a work trip, that's adding to our GDP because there's hospital visits, there's lawyers involved. I think it'd be really helpful for us to really establish our goals and then find ways to measure them that aren't always captured in traditional economic metrics.
Great point. Thank you, Rep. Pham. And I really appreciate that invitation from all of you for us to bring our suggestions and ideas and overall vision on policy. And I wanted to just say, as we wrap up here, business leaders, I think you've heard about some really important policies. There are a bunch of great questions still left to be addressed, and we'll keep working on those. But be on the lookout for requests from us and from OEC as well about committee hearings you might need to testify in to support good climate and equity policies, other communications efforts, op-eds, sign-on letters, other things to advance these and some other really key policies in the legislature this year. I was going to ask you all for one sentence each from the legislators about what businesses could best do, but maybe it's down to one word. What do you want them to do during session to help you advance the best policies? It is 11 o'clock, so we're in the speed round here. Any final word?
I would say,
go, Michael.
Yeah, I would just say engage, show up. The building will be open. We need to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, mine was going to be available, even though it's 2 words, but Michael took a lot longer than that too. So
awesome. Rep. Pham?
I guess believe in your visions.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, everybody. It's 11 o'clock. Thank you for making an hour to kind of get a preview. There'll be way more updates from us and our partners. Thank you again, Nora and OEC, for co-hosting this great event. And we'll be in touch, y'all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.